All right, hey, welcome back to another episode of the Peanut Gallery. We are doing our political special, and so we are looking at all the politics, and today we have with us Chelsea Hillier.
Woo!
Hello,
Chelsea!
hello.
So we are thrilled for her to come in. I've joked about this before, but we didn't know anybody would join us, and so for you guys to be here, it really does mean a lot. We know your schedules are hectic, and so we are grateful that you are here. For those of you guys who maybe haven't watched any of the other ones and you're just watching this one, we are very specific at the Peanut Gallery. Our goal last year and the future is stories. We want to get to know people. We want to know our community. And so our goal is not going to be getting controversial, going crazy here. We want to know who you are. And especially with this political campaign, we want to know who we can actually trust. Politicians have a reputation of saying things that aren't true, and so knowing who we can trust, in my opinion, matters, and in our opinion here at Peanut Gallery, matters a lot more than necessarily just having talking points. So that's the goal, but enough about me. So let's start with who is Chelsea Hillier. So give me a bit of a background, where you're from, where you grew up.
Sure.
I don't know, tell me your funniest stories or whatever, and then how you got to Elgin, Middlesex,
Right.
where we want to head.
So I grew up in Eastern Ontario, born and raised just outside of Ottawa. No offense to people in Ottawa, but it's a terrible, terrible place to be. So anyway, I actually spent most of my life there. And I went to university in Ottawa. I did a postgrad in Ottawa, worked in Ottawa for many years, but always sort of lived rurally outside of Ottawa because I am not much of a city person. So that's where I'm from. I've got two young sons. They're 6 and 7 years old. And in the last year and a half, of course, they were sort of ripped out of school multiple times. And so I made a decision around Christmas last year that I was going to take them out of school permanently and focus on homeschooling. And then that would give us some freedom to travel around and see some different parts of the world and the province that we live in. And so I ended up in London with my children and my partner Jacob, who is originally from Elmer. Okay. So that's how we ended up here. And when I got here, it was an incredible thing because the province was under total lockdown at that time. Yep. And after spending so much time out there, I got here and I realized that even though we were all under the same restrictions, it was a much more free place here. There were still people out and about doing things, and people didn't seem to be as afraid. So right off the bat, as soon as I moved here, I thought this is a place that I want to be. And then through my work with No More Lockdowns, I sort of got brought in very quickly to what I like to refer to as the freedom community in Elgin, Middlesex, London. So.
Okay, very, very
brief,
cool.
But that's it.
No, it's cool. And we actually really like this place too, just so we agree with you. We love it.
It's a truly amazing place. And I'll tell you, and people are surprised to hear this, it is so vastly different than Eastern Ontario. Like, it is worlds apart. Right. Not just the landscape and, that kind of thing, but the people. It is so different. Back east, anywhere sort of within a 2-hour radius of Ottawa is like very much like in the box thinking, very much like you need to follow the rules because everyone gets the bread and butter is government, right? That's how everyone makes their living. Whether you work for the government or you provide a service that serves the people who work for the government, that is the bread and butter. Right. And then when you come out here, it is not like that at all.
No, not at all.
And it's a really nice place to be.
Yeah, I know it's been interesting because we live like out here in Mount Salem, at least where we're located. I think there's like 200 people. And so when you're not on the news, you don't realize some of this other stuff because we're so used to this rural type of lifestyle. And so, yeah, we love it out here. Okay, so let's talk about the People's Party of Canada.
Sure.
A lot of us have no experience with this party whatsoever. And so we want to spend a good amount of time explaining, obviously we know you're against lockdown, some of that kind of stuff. Yes. And I do want to get a little more clarification on that because there's a lot of propaganda that comes in different, and so actually, what do you actually stand for, which is different necessarily. And so we do want to talk about that, but kind of give me a bit of a background on this party, and then let's talk platform, and then we'll finish off with kind of why you decided to join this party.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, the People's Party only formed a couple of years ago after I think the 2017 Conservative leadership race, which Maxime Bernier was running in. Following his loss, which is controversial among some groups, he decided to go out on his own and start his own party. So, of course, they did run a full slate of candidates in 2019, and obviously were unsuccessful in gaining a seat in the House of Commons. But I think, as we all know, 2019 was a very different time than 2021. Right. So as for the party platform, so the first thing that I'll say to you and to everyone watching is that unlike every other party, our platform is actually really accessible and you can actually read it, and it's not 85 or 185 pages of virtue signaling nonsense. It's literally laid out on the website, issue, facts, what we're going to do. And that's how it goes. So, we've got platform pieces on most of the issues that are really, pertinent to Canadians. Of course, we've got COVID policy, yes, which is actually brand new in the platform, but we've got, an entire policy on Indigenous relations, on immigrants and refugees, on healthcare, on equalization, on supply management. The list goes on and on. So the one thing that I really like about the platform is that the People's Party of Canada has a policy on Canadian identity. And to me, that's the most important one, because really every other piece ties back into that. And so just the sort of really simple way of saying this is that there is a recognition within the People's Party that Canada is an amazing country. Right. And that the people who live here are really amazing people. And that we have a lot of different cultures across the country, regional differences, like I just said, between Southwestern Ontario and Eastern Ontario. And we also have really rich First Nations culture that is incredibly important to our foundation. And of course, we've got the Francophones, and we've got, Acadians out east, and then everything in between. And this is something that really gets forgotten so often in our conversation around politics, and something that we rarely hear from Canadian media as well is that we really have an amazing country. Right. And we have a really, really rich history in this country, and that the people here represent something great, and that what we represent as Canadian people, as Canadian citizens, is worth preserving. So when you look at the entire platform through, you can see these threads through it. And it really is, it's a Canada-centric platform to make sure that anything we do as the People's Party of Canada is ensuring that we're putting the people of Canada first. Now, that's being perverted in some ways, as we all know, through the way that it's brought to the people, saying that we're anti-immigration or anti this, anti that. That's not true. It's this really fundamental belief in the greatness of this country, and that it's worth something.
So I guess my question then would be, how do we know that you guys are any more trustworthy than anyone else? And so something we said early on was politicians in general are not trusted by Canadians. And as I've met a lot of you guys are wonderful people. And so it's kind of hard to kind of go, well, I met the different candidates, you guys are great people, but overall our ability to trust seems to be very, very low. The percentage of Canadians who trust is very low. So how do we know then, as you guys being a new party, that it's not going to be the same thing where you say one thing and you get into power and it ends up being another?
I'm going to say something that might surprise you.
Well, everything will surprise me because I have no idea what to expect.
Fair. You shouldn't trust politicians. They have done nothing to show you that you should trust them. And in fact, we should distrust them perhaps more than we do. I think, personally, over the last year and a half, seeing what has been done to our country, in my mind, is an absolute travesty. And it has been done by politicians. Right. And I always said when, sort of early on in 2020, I said it was this incredible flip or switch that went off amongst, the Canadian public, where on March 12th, 2020, if you had gone out into the street and asked 10 or 100 people if they trust politicians, almost every single one, if not every single one, would have said, no, absolutely not. I do not trust politicians. And then on March 13th, when they shut down our society for COVID, if you had gone out into the street and asked those same 10 or 100 people, they would have said, yes, of course, we trust them because they have our best interest in mind. And I've always found that amazing because it really was a light switch that went off. And you know, politicians shouldn't be trusted. They should absolutely be held to account every single day by the people that they represent. And I said this before, I think before we turned on here, that our expectations of politicians is so low, and this has been something that's been degraded for years and years and years, that when our politicians straight up lie to us, excuse me, when they straight up lie to us or don't answer our questions, we just say, oh, well, they're politicians and that's what they do. Well, that's not okay. That's completely unacceptable for someone who holds public office. They have an absolute duty to serve the people that they represent. And so why should you trust us? I mean, you shouldn't. You know, you should look at our actions and determine whether we are good politicians or bad politicians.
Right.
And, you know, I truly hope that if I am elected here in Elgin, Middlesex, London, that I will be a good politician. I plan to be. I don't understand why anyone would run for public office who wasn't going to represent the people, because that's the entire job.
Right.
And I expect that if I fail, people will let me know and hold me accountable. So I can only speak for myself, but I think that most people who are running for the People's Party are people who are really passionate about changing Canadian politics, and you know, Canadians should hold them accountable if they elect them.
Right.
So.
Oh, it's a good answer. I think it's a bit of a spin because I agree. Like anybody in power, you want to hold them to account. The challenge is for a lot of us when you just watch the normal debates, it's all rhetoric from all the parties, and you're like, well, I don't know which person to actually trust.
Yes.
And that's where I think a lot of us, when a new party steps in, or the old party, and I think that's where a lot of people just stop voting, period,
Yes.
is because you don't actually know who to choose.
Yes.
Okay, so if I choose, you know, right now, a lot of us are unhappy with Doug Ford, but we're also unhappy with Justin Trudeau.
Yes.
So it's like, which route? Right, and so then that idea of, okay, well, who do I think actually does hold my best interest? It is a big thing.
It's a leap of faith.
Right.
Anytime you vote. You know, it is. And so you can never know what the outcome is going to be.
Right.
But, you know, if you have someone representing you who will pick up your phone call, or, you know, make sure that they get in touch with you if you've reached out to them, if you can see that your representative is prioritizing you as their constituent, then that's a pretty good indicator, at least, that they can be trusted to some degree, you know. Now, we can all be cynical and just say that we should trust no one. But it is a leap of faith.
Right. So. And one of the things I do agree with is that we can get really frustrated with things that we're mad about in Canada, but it is an incredible place to live.
It is.
When you look around the world, like, and I know some people are my friends are even like, I'm going to leave. Well, to where? Where would you go? There are some incredible people. It is an incredible nation. I do think it is worth fighting to keep what we have because it is a great place to live. Let me ask you a little bit of a side question.
Okay.
How do we unite a country coming out of this? Because we lived in one of the epicenters of disunity. Yes. And we are still in the midst of it. And one of my frustrations is feeling like somebody who's somewhat moderate, where both sides hated me at different points. Right? But how do you move forward as a party? Because I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges for any candidate coming out of this. How do you create a space where people can have opinions? But like, I'll just give you our experience, and because not everybody listening knows our Elmer experience, but both sides just screamed at each other, and you had the one side calling everybody Nazis and everything else, and then the other side swearing and cursing at them. Like it was a terrible time
Nazis
to really
Nazis and murderers. Right. Those are the two sides.
Right, and it's
argument.
And it's just really hard when you're sitting here like I want to ignore both of you. Like how do we have conversation that actually legitimately talks about the issues, because I think at issue here, the biggest one for most of us, and in our room, we lost, my best friend to COVID. So this is a personal thing to me. I want to do what's best for my country, but it feels like both sides are now so far apart that if you don't agree, you're the enemy on both ways. How do we move forward and try to unify that?
Okay, so I'm going to try to answer this question as succinctly as I can, but it's a little bit deep.
And it's a huge question.
Yeah.
So
okay, so first of all, again, before we started rolling, we were talking about sort of the radical, the radical ends of the spectrum.
Yep.
And in reality, the vast majority of Canadians exist somewhere in between the radical ends of the COVID debate.
Right.
Okay, like some people might say that I exist on one end of the radical end, but I still love talking to people, and I have never stopped talking to people, and I respect the fact that we have different experiences and different ideas about it. So I think that that's actually where the majority of Canadians exist. But that is not shown to us ever, and this is, part of culturally how we've sort of evolved, and it's been helped by politicians and by the mainstream media and by social media, highlighting the absolute radical voices and politicians often, creating dissent among people. So I'll tell you, just because I've been in the sort of anti-lockdown, crowd for 18 months and then moving into the People's Party realm, I've talked to thousands of people, okay? And they are from across every single political affiliation, from all walks of life, young, old, all different races, male, female, the whole thing.
Right.
And the vast majority of people just want to be able to live freely and happily in a country. And of course, that includes wanting people to be safe and healthy. Yep. Of course we want that. So how do we get there? That's the question. But we're not going to get there if we've got media, constantly feeding us this nonstop narrative that we're all divided in a million different ways.
Right.
COVID is just a new way to divide people. And now you see unvaxxed and vaxxed is a new way to divide people, but this is a cultural issue. And as Canadians, it's up to us to change it. We're the ones that can change it. We're the ones who can demand better from our politicians and from our media to actually do a better job showing what life is really like. I know Elmer was a very specific place in the world during this entire thing.
Well, did you ever, so for us, I often, when I'm watching the news and you hear this tiny little town, you're like, I wonder what that was like living in a tiny town on major news. And now we're that town.
Yes.
So, there was lots of good too. It forced conversations here that I think a lot of towns didn't have.
Absolutely.
But we also saw the ugly side of it where it just turned to just outright hatred. No conversation, just hatred, right?
And it's still going on in Elmer, but that said, I went out and door knocked in Elmer the other night, and we got told to, get lost by one person out of, 150 houses that we hit.
To defend myself, I did not know it was you. I'm sorry. I've tried to apologize repeatedly. My front light was out. It was kind of I'm sorry.
Truthfully, and this it's funny that you say this because it wasn't just a get lost thing. It was Chelsea Hillier is a bleep, 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 bleep. And that's fine. But I wasn't there. And I so wish that my team had called me over so that I could have said to this guy, hey, I get it. I get where you're coming from, because we all have these ideas, and we're fed certain information and we see certain information. And so, a lot of people think I'm an absolute crackpot weirdo, anti-lockdown, anti-everything person. So, I love these situations, and I wish that I had got to speak to you the other night.
To some extent, as pastors, we understand. We understand. We understand.
So anyway, now I forget what we were talking about, but
yes.
We're not as divided as they tell us we are.
We're on a low budget. Things are falling apart over here. Oh, we're still good.
And I think this is, just to go back to one of my other comments about our platform is like, we aren't told that there's a common thing that we can all be fighting for. We're so divided by like special interests and all of these divisions that they impose upon us, when we could all be fighting for Canada and Canadians. So
all right, so let's talk about the next 4 years.
Okay.
So you get in. Obviously, this is something we need to work through. For us personally, I mean, you were the first interview after the certificate / passport, whatever Ontario announced. So, I mean, that will be a massive thing. But let's get outside of that. What are some of the other things that you're really hoping at the end of my 4 years as an elected person? Here's some of the things I'm really dreaming and visioning of being able to accomplish up in Parliament.
You're very optimistic in thinking that I'm going to answer this outside of the COVID narrative. It's not that there's nothing else that I'm passionate about, but I don't know how we are going to get to those other things without facing the things that are right in front of us first. Right. There are a lot of Canadians and a lot of people in Elgin, Middlesex, London who are feeling incredibly terrified, who are feeling very disillusioned because they feel like the protections that have been put in place for us as Canadians, like our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, no longer stand. Right. When people feel unsafe, when people feel threatened by their government and completely abandoned, actually, in many cases, by their government, that's a bad place for a country to be. Right. And it's going to be very hard for us to work through a lot of the other things that we have on deck without first coming together as a country and coming together as Elgin, Middlesex, London, and deciding where our priorities actually stand. So for me, that's really like the forefront of everything. But I think, beyond that, I am sure a lot of other people who are running for this seat and seats across the country have, a platform piece or policy that they like to speak to the most. But truly, like my biggest goal in this is to be able to look at our culture and say, like, where are we failing? And a lot of those conversations overlap with the COVID narrative and how we got to where we are. So one thing that I rail on about almost incessantly, and Jacob probably hates me for talking about this again and everyone, but we have really, in a lot of ways, abandoned the individual for the collective good. Yep. And this has been going on for a long time in our society, but we've sort of reached the peak of it this year, where if you lose your business and you can no longer support your family or feed your kids, it doesn't matter. Your suffering does not matter because it's for the collective good. And I see this as sort of the biggest issue in Canada right now. And so what I would like to do is have this conversation with everyone and talk about how we can get back to this idea that every single human is valuable and is worth something. Right. We all have something to offer. And so then how do you create an environment in which every individual can prosper, right, and succeed and reach their goals? And so a lot of the social issues that we see in Canada right now around mental health and addiction, things like that, I really feel like those conversations should be, why are we experiencing this? And I think most often the answer is because we are no longer talking about the supreme, part of our society, which is every individual. Right. So I think that this is a really important conversation. And when we talk about all of these, social issues that we're all seeing, we see it, in this riding when you drive down the main street of St. Thomas, for example, no one's actually talking about how we got here. This didn't happen overnight, and again, this is like a cultural shift that has to happen, but we can't have that cultural shift unless we're actually talking about it.
Right.
So
do you think so one of my thoughts as you were talking there is, and we've talked often just in our circles here, is we've become overly dependent on the government for a lot of these things. And so when I talk to people who've lived a longer time, they talk about back when communities still cared for communities.
Yes.
And is that kind of part of what your
Absolutely.
thought process of?
There are really foundational institutions in our country that have been degraded and diminished over time, and that includes the church and the family and marriage and these kinds of things, where in fact all of those things have become not only diminished but often spoken badly about. The things that have tied us together in the past and have created strength and unity and community are sold to us as something bad. And I can speak to this as, I'll say youngish woman. I'm,
Well played.
What do you mean? I know. What is this?
I'm youngish. I think
Patrick, you yell at her one time and she starts insulting me.
I mean, he's young. We're youngish. Okay.
Don't put me in that. Okay. Anyways, carry on. Youngish.
But I talk to people about this, and I say, like, I was really sort of one of the first generations that was really sold this idea that, not the first, but I think when it became really sort of ingrained in our education system and things like that, and in popular culture, that marriage is actually a bad thing because it's a part of the patriarchy, and it keeps women down, and you shouldn't want it or do it, okay? Because it's dangerous for you as a woman. And like, that's not true. Right. Marriage is a wonderful thing. It should be a wonderful thing, and it should create stability and unity and community in your life. Yep. And the church is the same thing, as you guys, I think, well, I'll say, as you know.
Some of you may argue, but we think so.
So, these things are really, really important. Right. And when they are degraded in the way that they have been, people lose the path, you know, and they lose all of those support structures that exist around them. And what fills its place is government. Right. And we know that government is ineffective. Right. We know that government doesn't have the best interest of every single individual at heart. We know that government has a desire for control and power. No. And how do you control people? How do you hold on to power? You disempower your population. Yeah.
Well, power is a funny thing. I remember when I worked in a factory years ago, and somebody just going from a normal line position to a little line leader. All of a sudden, you're like, who are you? And power is a crazy thing. But I do think that there's a lot of validity to that we've lost the ability to care for each other in our community. And I mean, there's a lot of variables to that. We have the ability to drive. We have the ability to connect with people far away. So there isn't the need for neighbors the way it once was. But I do think there's a piece of that really matters. The other thing that I really think is that with our media representing us the way we do, we just don't realize how good we have it. Like when you look at people fleeing Afghanistan, when you look at the way there's so many countries in the world, what are they looking for? They're looking to come to a place where they can pursue their dream, where they can pursue freedom, and so I think we have lost how good we have it here, and I really agree with that.
Well, and we're also told, we're told that it's not good here because we're racist, or we're killing the environment, or like name a special interest, and I'll tell you how Canadians are terrible people, and how our country is terrible. But that's not the reality. Right. The reality is that we do have it really good here, and the people here are really good people, and you know why people want to come here. Right. Is because we have it really good here, and the people here are really good. Right. And I think, I'll harp on this forever. Like, we should celebrate what we've got instead of constantly be tearing each other down and talking about how terrible we are and the terrible things that we. Yeah, there's room to talk about the mistakes that have been made, of course. Because you never grow if you don't look at those things. But it doesn't have to be the primary focus of everything you do is your failures. Right.
Try that in marriage sometimes.
Right?
We're just going to focus on your failures, honey. Let's talk about it, right? Yeah, no, 100%. I think we need accountability.
He's laughing very hard right now.
So let's talk specifically. So I read this morning again, and I would agree in our region that, yes, COVID is huge, but housing is another major concern. Housing in our region here has doubled, some houses tripled. average rent right now is beyond the ability for the average human being to. It's not even just that. Well, I'll just rent. I can't afford to buy. It's I can't afford to rent and I can't afford to buy. Moving into that, thoughts from your party as to how we get at least move in the direction of making that affordable again.
So housing is a major issue here. It's a major issue in most places in Ontario right now, and it's very troubling. So there's a number of reasons why we're in this place. One is our deficit and the inflation that is a result of the deficit that has been created at the federal level, and the mismanaged money at every level of government, really. The other issue, I know it's a huge issue in London, which is then impacting here in Elgin Middlesex, is that we are having houses being bought for $100, $200, $250, sometimes $300,000 over the asking price. Yep. And I've spoken to people, they've called me since I've gotten into this, saying they've literally had offers come in from Chinese investors. Yep. Okay, these are not Chinese families. These are Chinese investors. They are backed by the state in China, and they're coming in to the housing market in London and literally bidding $200,000 over the asking price. And now you've got Canadians being forced to choose whether they, do the quote unquote right thing and sell to someone at a lower price, who is living here and wants to raise their family here or what have you, or, take the money because they need it for their family, right? So I'm generally speaking not a fan of more regulation. I don't necessarily think that regulation and legislation is the way to solve most problems. Yep. But in this specific context, we have to do something. Right. We have to put, and especially because a lot of the money that is being put into the housing market here is being used, it's just a way to launder money, right? And so we have to be very concerned about that as Canadians, because it has a huge ripple down effect. Now, we can also, when we talk about rent, we can also talk about issues that are not necessarily federal, surrounding the Landlord-Tenant Act and the protections in place for tenants, which are important, but that landlords suffer often because of the protections. And so, we lack some balance in that regard. But I do think, we're going to be in big trouble soon because the housing prices cannot continue to go up the way that they are right now. Right. At some point, it's going to crash. You know?
No, and for us, it's a concern because we have kids growing up and going,
Exactly.
You're not going to be able to afford to live here. We're making space in our house.
Well, I mean, you literally, and it's not the worst thing to go back to a multi-generational housing model, but you also want your kids to move out and, experience life on their own and do all of the things that we've gotten to do, right? But no, it's a really complex issue. And I think, there's a lot of blame to go around for it. But the reality is not only that the house prices are going up, but that all prices are going up across the board, right? Yeah. And this is something that's being driven by the deficit, which is, the government spending that is so far over what they can bring in, right? And that's what causes inflation. That's what has the ripple down effect through every single part of our economy. So if we don't start to rein in some of that spending, then our economy is eventually going to collapse. And I think it's probably going to happen sooner rather than later. So,
okay, so one more question for you, and then I'll let the peanut gallery. I don't know if you guys got stuff. We got one, maybe. Let's see what's on.
We still have to discuss the other night. You still didn't get to say to me what you thought.
All right, so I want to talk to you if you don't get elected. So we've asked every candidate this. What's the next couple years look like? What are you planning to use your time and effort and energy for?
Did you say if I don't get elected?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I haven't thought about that. No, I intend.
I was like, really? Wow. Okay. All right.
I intend on winning. Okay, so that's one thing. And I like to put that out there because a lot of people think that I, am going in as an underdog, but I'm not. Anyway, but the next 4 years, I mean, who knows? Like, who can even talk about what the next 2 months hold at this point? You know, I think I will exist in this world in some activist capacity as long as we are facing the issues that we're facing today. You know, I will also, because my kids will never go back to school as long as there's masking, social distancing, social bubbles, vaccine passports, you know. So I will also spend a lot of my time at home with my kids, making sure that they learn the things that they have to learn. But I will, you know, remain involved in this sort of community grassroots activism until we get to a place that we want to be. So basically, I'll be doing the exact same thing. Just in one place, I would be able to do it, you know, bring the voice of Elgin Middlesex to London and represent the needs and the wants of the constituents here. And on the other hand, I'll just be here yelling into the abyss, like with a cowbell and a sandwich board on Main Street in Elmer. So
it's good. I like it. You'll fit right in here. All right. You guys got... No, you're good. We're good. All right. Hey, well...
Wow.
I
really?
know.
I'm just trying to plan how I'm going to answer for what happened the other night.
Hey, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for running.
My pleasure.
You know what? I think one of the things that we're really hoping to inspire people is that we cannot continue to sit on the sidelines, whichever your opinion, wherever you sit. We got to stop sitting on the sidelines and just saying, well, it doesn't matter who we elect, because it does matter. And these last couple of years have very deeply showed us that it does matter.
Yes.
So thanks for stepping up. Thanks for taking the time out of a busy schedule to show
My
up
pleasure.
here. We've appreciated it. Thanks for watching. We shall see you on the next one.
Thank you.